I want to base what I have to say on a passage in the Old Testament. It's 1 Kings chapter 8. Solomon has just finished building the new temple, and this is the story of them bringing the Ark of the Covenant into that temple. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the fathers' houses, and the people of Israel before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of the Lord, the tent of the meeting, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites brought them up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be counted or numbered. Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim overshadowed the ark and its poles. And the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from outside. And they are there to this day. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. And when the priests came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. In my spare time, I like to dabble in a little bit of woodwork. I carve spoons. It's not something that I've done a great deal of, and quite frankly, I guess I'm on a steep learning curve with it. But sometimes I just get completely lost in the repeated action of slicing through the wood with a sharp chisel. There's something therapeutic in it for me, so much so that I can completely forget about everything else as I focus solely on the task of cutting away the wood in order to reproduce the shape that I have in my mind for the spoon that I'm making. But recently I was working on a piece of reclaimed teak, and the spoon I was trying to make was quite intricate and needed a lot of care and a lot of thought. The shape I wanted to create was quite a challenging one for me, at least, and it was one I was fairly excited about, because if I pulled it off I was sure that it was going to look quite good. But I remember one Saturday morning, after about 2 hours of working away with a chisel in one hand and a mallet in the other, that I stopped, looked at the wood, and I suddenly realized that it was beautiful. Not the shape that I was making, not the spoon, that hadn't taken form yet, but the wood itself. It was so colourful. The grain was filled with oranges and reds and even greens, and with such an intensity that I just didn't think it was possible for a piece of wood to look like this. And for a few moments, I simply couldn't carve anymore. The wood was already beautiful. I just hadn't seen that before. In the story that I've just read, the priests were going about their work of ministering in the temple as the Ark of the Covenant was being brought in. They were serving the people and serving God by leading the nation's worship, when all of a sudden the entire building was filled with a strange cloud. And this cloud was so dense, so disruptive, that they could no longer carry on doing what they were doing. They had to stop. But it was in that stopping that they could see and appreciate that this was the cloud of God's presence. The cloud was the visible representation of the glory of God. Now, what we mean when we talk about the glory of God is the magnificence, the splendor, and the beauty of who God is. In the Bible, the cloud is one way in which God made his presence known. The glory of the Lord is in this place. God is making his splendor known through this cloud. And this is what the priests now encountered in the temple. And this cloud that they saw and that enveloped them, it has quite a story. In the book of Exodus, we see the cloud there in a pillar, a form of a pillar that guided Israel out of Egypt. It demonstrated that God was doing something really amazing, something that revealed his magnificent beauty and his goodness. But we see this cloud also in the New Testament. In the Gospels, we read that on the Mount of Transfiguration, a cloud covered the scene where Jesus had been speaking with Moses and Elijah. And a voice spoke from the cloud and said, "This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him." The point, of course, is that in Jesus, God is doing something even better than when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. Jesus is the leader of a new and a greater Exodus. But returning to these verses, two things strike me. The first is how this cloud stopped the priests from ministering. They were forced to stop sorting out the sacrifices, playing the instruments, and whatever else they were doing, because the cloud was so dense, so intense, so different from anything that they had experienced. They had to pause. They had to do nothing. They had to wonder. It was, of course, an experience that would have reminded them of their forefathers following the pillar of cloud in the wilderness as they journeyed from Egypt to the Promised Land. It would have been full of meaning. The Redeemer God is among them right now. The same God who led them out of Egypt into the Promised Land is present with them right now. And known to them, it was also an experience that pointed forward to the coming of Christ, the great Redeemer made flesh, come to rescue the entire human race. All of this would have added to their wonder, their sense of awe, and, of course, their inability to work. And I guess that's the point. It's when we stop that we can pay greater attention to our thoughts and our feelings. It's when we stop that we can pay greater attention to what we see and hear and to what we experience. Stopping is necessary in order to reflect and appreciate what's going on for us in that moment. And because of this, stopping is also often necessary in order to perceive God in what is going on all around us. But stopping is so often such a difficult thing to do. What will people think if they see that I'm not busy? Will others think that I'm lazy and idle? Will I be disliked because I'm not busy or not as busy as others? But unless we stop, unless we take time to do what these priests did, that is to see God, then our work will become very empty of meaning. It will become very empty of purpose. Or else the meaning and purpose it will have will become focused on lesser objectives, such as pleasing others, serving ourselves, that sort of thing. We need to stop, not only to rest, but also to take time to reflect, perceive, and to process our perceptions, to recognize God in the world around us. The second thing that strikes me about this passage is that the cloud is such an ordinary and unspectacular way for God to represent his glory. Instead of something beautiful, something spectacular, God chose to be present in the mist and the fog. God is there. We simply need to stop doing and start perceiving. Start looking. To do this, perhaps we need to search for God in unexpected places and in unexpected forms. Who would have thought that something as ordinary and as mundane, even as annoying as fog, could possibly represent God's glory? And so we need to look. We need to look in the urban and built up places, and not just in the countryside. We need to look in the noisy and not just the silent, in the untidy and not just in the ordered, in the ugly and not just in the beautiful, in the discordant, not just in the harmonious, in the darkness as well as in the light, in the ordinary as well as the extraordinary, and in the everyday as well as in the spectacular. When we see beauty, when we see the beauty of God, that is, in the grain of our everyday life, in the ugly, in the dark, in the noisy and in the ordinary, as well as in the harmonious, the silent and the light, it is then that God is seen to be truly wonderful. And so wherever you are and whatever you're doing, right there, you can stop and you can see God. Seeing the beauty of the grain of that piece of teak I was working on, it gave me a sense of reassurance. It de-stressed me, because no matter what I did with my mallet and chisel, no matter how the spoon really turned out in the end, this piece of wood would always be an object of wonder. It would always be beautiful.